Previously, we showed you how to build a db.php page to connect to the database. We are going to use that db.php page to be able to actually execute queries against our database. So here on the second tutorial here, you'll notice that we have a description of what we're going to do. So essentially what we're going to do is issue a query behind the scenes that are going to find all the employees that are supervised by employee ID number 3. So we have 3 employees here that are listed. We also are going to show you how to build this table using HTML together with PHP. And then we have a header up here of supervisor subordinates, and we'll show you how to do that as well. So down here on the instructions, it shows that we're going to go ahead and create a page called supervisor.php. The first thing that we're going to do is build the HTML part of the PHP page. And the reason why is it's easier to build something and then put the placeholders where we need to at a later point. So this is a doc type of HTML. We're going to have everything that is in between here part of our HTML. Then we'll have our head. The head is basically the metadata that describes what's going to be on the page, such as the title of the page, the favicon, etc. And particularly here, we are linking to our CSS file. Our CSS file, as you may recall, is to help us style our page. We are going to use the Bootstrap template here as a preferred form of building out the pages there. So inside the body is where we're going to have all the information that we're going to display on the page. So on this page, we're going to have 2 divs. So div stands for division in a page. This first div is going to display the supervisor subordinates, as you can see up here, this part in blue. And inside the div, we have a class attribute. The class attribute determines what's going to happen to that specific div. So BG primary makes the supervisor subordinates area blue. The text white changes the letters from black to white. Text center centers that text. P5 adds a large padding around it, so you see that the whole blue area is pretty large. And then MB3 adds this little spacing that you see between the actual blue and the text here. If I didn't include that, those words would butt right up next to that supervisor subordinates. And then our second container is going to actually display the results that we're going to use when we query and create a table that we're going to display. So to do that, we are going to use PHP to echo the results, and then we'll close our PHP. Remember to have a semicolon at the end of every line of PHP. So we'll close it there. And so this is what we mean by building our HTML first. Now we have a placeholder here that we're going to fill with our results. Now, if you are struggling to follow along, you can always pause this video and go back, or follow along with what is being discussed here, because this is specifically what we are going to use. So the next thing I'm going to do after I built my HTML is I'm going to go to the very top of the page. You always write your PHP code at the top, except for the pieces that you're going to echo straight to the browser. So in this case, I'm going to declare a blank variable of $results equals blank, meaning that nothing is going to be stored in it. Ultimately, this is that variable at the bottom that we are going to echo our results. And so we need to declare it to be able to echo it. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to connect to our database by importing that db.php page that we previously created. This basically imports all the contents of that entire file to establish that connection. And if you look back at that file, we actually have a variable that comes out of it. And that variable is our $con variable, which we're going to use for when we actually execute our query. So you'll notice it shows up here again. So ultimately, what I'm going to do is type in a query. It might be wise to test out these queries before you actually put them into PHP to ensure that they work. Because if they don't work when you run them against the database, they sure will not work when you actually put them inside of your PHP. So here's our query. You'll notice here that I've added a lecture 354A. It could be whatever lecture database you're using in front of the employee table here. And the reason why I'm doing this is this would work regardless of what I set as my database in my db.php page. So if I use my personal net ID or if I use my group schema, for example, this would still pull the information from the lecture schema as long as I have access to it. If you are working on other personal information, you would want to put your personal database here, maybe like your net ID or something like that. If you're working with your group schema, you would want to put your group schema name right here. So what I'm doing is I'm putting this entire query inside quotes and then putting a semicolon, because you have to have a semicolon at the end of every PHP line. I am then going to have a new variable called query, which is going to be equal to that new query. We will get to this discussion later on, but you're going to prepare your queries against SQL injections because SQL injections are the #1 avenue of attack against databases. And if you don't properly code your information, you're going to allow people to have access to your data, and you don't necessarily want that. So this prepare is going to give us a statement, and then to actually execute that statement against the database, I need to run statement arrow execute. Now, you always need to execute it. Just having the text here is not going to actually do anything. So when I execute it, it's going to display all of the results of that query inside of this statement variable. So at this point, the next thing that I'm going to do is loop through the results of this. If there was only one result, I could do statement fetch, and that would give me that one result. I could set that equal to a variable and use that. However, we have multiple results. As you can see, we have 3 rows that we returned from this query. So we're going to use for each, which is basically a loop, which means it's going to do a certain condition until that condition is no longer true. So for example, the condition here is we're going to loop through the statement and grab the first row, and then we'll do everything between this curly bracket and this curly bracket. And then when it's done that, it's going to come up here. It's going to check the statement again, see if there's another row, and run this again. And it will keep doing this until there are no more rows to run through. So what are we going to do with that row? Well, we're going to take the results variable that we've defined previously up there that was nothing, and we're going to use dot, which means concatenate in PHP. So we're going to use that to add to our results variable. And what we're going to do is add a table row. So in HTML, TR stands for table row. So we're going to add inside of that 3 cells, table data, TD. So we're going to add a cell that contains the employee ID, a cell that contains the first name, and a cell that contains the last name. Now you'll notice here, the row is actually a list of values. So we are going to use this curly bracket so that it doesn't error out. And then we're going to say inside of that row variable, look for the column of data that is contained employee ID and return that value. So as you can see here, the first employee has an employee ID of 1. So in that first row, this is going to grab number 1 and store it here. Then we're going to do the same thing for the first name and last name, which will give us Phil and Morris. After we've gone through and looped through all the results, we are now going to generate our table and display a message saying what is actually returned. So we are going to take that results variable above and we're going to override it. We're going to override it first with H5, which is a header 5, which is this slightly larger text, as you can see here. And then we are going to add a table, and this table is using specific classes to make it look nice. So the table class is to generate this table. The table bordered is to add the gray border that you see here. And the table striped is to add the alternating color rows between the odd and the even number rows. We are going to then add first a table row that is going to be full of THs, which mean table headers. So we have table header employee ID, table header first name, table header last name. So we're going to generate 3 different columns. And then after that, we are going to paste in the results from above. So remember up here, we had looped through and we grabbed all the results. And we have 3 rows of data. And so before we overwrite the results, we're going to overwrite it with all this and place those 3 rows of data right here. And that's going to be stored in our results variable. The last thing that we're going to do is close our connection. And so we just say connection equals null. Remember, the connection was created with our db.php page where we did the require once above. And so we're just going to set that variable equal to nothing, so there's no longer an open connection. So ultimately, what's going to happen after this is all done, we are going to have a results variable that has a table with all the rows, and that is going to be echoed here out to the browser like we just showed you previously. So scrolling down over here, you'll notice here that I give an explanation of the different steps that the CSS applies to each of these settings. You can see the CSS file and what classes it contains here. The dot represented here indicates a class, and so you'll see what is actually applied to specific pieces that are echoed to the browser. So to show you what this is going to look like, I'm just going to go back to the PHP page. I'll copy this, and then I'll create a new page. So here I am back at my file directory. I'm going to go ahead and create a file called supervisor.php. I'm going to go ahead and edit this file. I'll paste the code that I have there, and you'll notice that it loads the page. So this does everything that we just explained and walked you through previously. One other thing that I wanted to talk about is this universal table code. If you notice here, this allows us to have some flexibility when creating our table. I'm going to rather copy all this except for the PHP part at the beginning and the end. And I'm going to come back to my supervisor.php page. And I want to show you what this is going to do. So instead of having all this table code, the for each loop and everything, once I execute the query, if I paste this universal code here in lieu of the actual table information that I had before, it automatically is going to build that table regardless of how many columns I have. For example, previously I defined how many columns I wanted. So here instead it's returning all the columns because I have star. So if I change this to first name, last name, and employee ID, you'll notice that it only displays those 3 columns. Essentially, I can change which columns I'm interested in displaying and it will work regardless. However, if we go back to our previous code where we specifically detailed what columns we're going to display, it works, but if I come up here and display any other column that I want to, it's not going to show up because I'm specifically saying which columns I want to. So feel free to use this universal code at your disposal. Just know that it doesn't work in all cases. Sometimes you may want to do like some summations or other things. Thanks for watching my video. Feel free to click the links here to watch the next video of the playlist, continue to the next playlist, or subscribe.